Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you showing up. I am going to hand it over to the team. They're going to talk about the 2025 May Revise. And thank you also to all our board members and our president-elect in the audience.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie Goldman. I'm the Executive Director here at the Faculty Association. Anna,
Hi everyone, I'm Anna. I'm the Government Relations Director.
Sarah, we'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, Vice President of FAC.
And we just saw Wendy. So we're really, really excited that you all have joined us. This is a really significant time in the budget timeline, and there's a lot going on. So today we're going to be going over what the May Revise is, try to put it into context. You might have heard stuff about it on the radio or on the news, and it's the kind of thing we at FAG are dealing with every day. We'll talk a little bit about what the governor has actually proposed in his May Revise, what the future budgets look like, because the Ledge Analyst's Office and the Department of Finance are trying to predict budgets going into the next 3, 4, 5 years. We'll talk about next steps because that's incredibly important. Everybody on this call is a factivist, and we want to use that power. And then finally, hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. So what is the May Revise? The May Revise is the annual update to the governor's proposed state budget. So in January, Governor Newsom had this big televised speech where he introduced what he thought the 2025-26 budget it was going to look like, and made recommendations based on where he thinks the state should spend its money, where it should put its resources. A budget is a value proposition, right? So where you put your money is what you're going to value the most. California has to have a balanced budget. We are not the federal government, and that makes this an incredibly complicated thing to figure out. You're going to see a lot of talk today about deferrals, possibly conversations about cuts, though not so much for our system, and a number of other things that come up when it comes to trying to balance the budget in a really tough budget year. So the May Revise has to be released by May 14th, which is exactly what happened. And this is a chart of what the California budget process looks like. First, we get the governor's budget proposal in January. We actually have a bill that's introduced. For those of you who have been around for a long time, back in 2018, we saw the student-centered funding formula and Calbright introduced in the budget bill. At that time, that was pretty weird. Ever since then, we've seen a lot of pretty serious policy propositions made in the budget. We always get an analysis from the Legislative Analyst's Office. They're the nonpartisan government agency that advises our legislature. And then we have a number of Senate budget committees and Assembly budget committees through February, March, and April. The relevant budget committees for what we do typically are Senate Sub 1, the education budget, and then on the Assembly side, it's the higher education one. They discuss, they debate, they have the Department of Finance come, they question the Department of Finance, they question the Chancellor's office, and they get really, really deep into what is actually in the governor's budget proposal. They make their own assumptions. For those of you who came to FACC's Advocacy and Policy Committee in February and actually did some of these visits, you got to talk about some of our concerns regarding the January budget proposal. So we're all the way here at the May Revise, and they're getting ready to start the conference committees where the legislature is talking about what they want to adopt, what they want to do differently. The three most important people when it comes to the California state budget are the governor, the pro tem, and the speaker. So after months and months of all this discussion, ultimately, it's going to come down to those three people. You will most likely see Republicans complain when a final budget bill does come out, and somewhat rightfully so. It is a very behind closed doors kind of conversation when we get to these final months, and that is pretty controversial in a lot of circles. The legislature will have to pass a budget if they want to get paid, period. I think some of us remember back when it would take them months and months and they would be super overdue with a budget. Well, they finally made a change to that, and now they have to have some form of a budget passed by mid-June, and then the governor signs it. Typically, by the time he gets to that point, he is actually going to sign it, right? We will have to continue working on budget issues throughout July and August. Those are the budget trailer bills. A lot of times they'll propose these amazing policy ideas, without actually figuring out what they're going to do with those or how that's going to be implemented. We saw that most recently a couple of years ago when they introduced the part-time healthcare funding. Amazing funding, but it took months and months after the budget bill was actually passed to figure out how that would be distributed and how they would do that. So it's a really complicated and somewhat convoluted process, but at least now it tends to be on time. Anna, did you want to start with this one?
Yeah, so a general overview of the 2025 May Revise, we have a total projected deficit of $12 billion. Compared to the January budget proposal that we received from the governor, it's looking like the community college funding from the May Revise is $111 million less than what we saw earlier this year. We have seen a decrease in the cost of living adjustment from the proposed 2.43% to 2.3% from community college apportionments, which, however, is greater than what we received last year. We have also seen 2.35% enrollment growth funded instead of 0.5%, which is what we thought we were going to get, which is really good. Had almost, I believe, 20,000 unfunded full-time equivalent students in our system as we have colleges that are growing. So this money is going to help us be able to cover all of that and be able to provide for our system and our colleges as they continue to grow post-COVID. So this image is from the joint analysis of the May Revise, which we will have a QR code to that at the end of this presentation. We can see the 2024-2025 enacted total state budget versus the state general funds, and then the total community college budget and the community college general funds sort of over from 2024 to the May revision. And we can see on the two rightmost columns that we have some decreases, right, since the proposed budget, the blue bar in January, to the darker gray one on the right of that. We've gone from 14.5 billion to 14.2 billion for the overall community college budget, and from 9.1 billion to 8.8 billion in community college general funds. And as we can see, the state budget has dropped a little bit since the January budget proposal, as well as the state general fund. So we're kind of, we get different amounts of information, right, based on the budget and how much resources California has available to us over time, and the May Revise really reflects the most current numbers that we have. So that's why that sort of changes between January and May, with tax revenue coming in and all that good stuff. All right, so into the nitty-gritty of the California Community College budget. So we saw a lot of different amounts of money, often significant amounts of money, for different initiatives coming from the governor in the January budget proposal, including the statewide technology transformation money, a system-wide common data platform, credit for prior learning, and career passports. Lots of these were aligned with the governor's master plan for career education initiatives. That being said, we just don't have money in the budget for all of that this year, so the funding for those programs have been significantly reduced in the May revision. FACC had expressed some concerns about the large funding amounts that were supposed to be tied to these programs in January, so we feel that this is more reasonable. Rising Scholars is one of the only programs that really got funding increases in the January budget when many other programs were really getting cut. So their increase has gone down from 30 million to 10 million, but it's still an increase. So we're still appreciative of that, recognizing that these are difficult budget times and the community colleges have been relatively shielded compared to other agencies and sectors. Funding for the California Education Interagency Council was rescinded, so we'll see what happens with that in future years. I believe the bill corresponding with that proposal has become a 2-year bill, so we'll see what happens to that this upcoming January. As for the California Community College Chancellor's Office, starting last year, all agencies sort of received a cut to their operational budget. That's continuing on this year with a 6% reduction to their operational budget with a 3.4% ongoing reduction. One thing that is great is for the colleges who were sadly impacted by the Los Angeles wildfires, there's been an appropriation for $3.8 million this year and $8 million, in 25 to 26 for them to really be able to recover and rebuild. Okay, so this is, I think, one of the biggest topics of conversation in the California Community College budget space in the days since the May Revise. the California community colleges are covered with K through 12 under this bucket of money called Prop 98. And that has really shielded us from cuts compared to the CSUs and UCs. That being said, we have a split of the Prop 98 money between TK through 12 and of course community college money. Historically, we've received kind of 11% of that funding of the Prop 98 pot, even though the community colleges serve 14.5% of the actual Prop 98 workload. So despite the fact that we're kind of covering more of that than the money we're actually getting paid, this May Revise proposal, the governor wanted to shift $492.4 million away from the California community colleges to fund universal TK with $230 million of those dollars ongoing. So that, of course, was a big object of concern for us. We know that it's a delicate issue. We, of course, 100% support universal transitional kindergarten, and we understand that that's a really important thing, and it's something that the state has committed to making happen. That being said, we serve the most vulnerable adult students, and we are the largest segment of higher education in the country, right? And we need to protect our funding and protect our students. So we've done a significant amount of budget advocacy on this issue. We will keep you posted on what happens with that. So we did put out a press release on the May Revise, and this is our FACC President, Wendy Brillwine-Coop's statement on that issue. We fully support and recognize the importance of investing in transitional kindergarten. However, redirecting $92.4 million away from the community college system over 3 years would seriously affect our students. Just as TK serves California's most vulnerable young learners, the California community colleges provide needed access and support to the state's most vulnerable adult populations. So we are certainly doing everything we can on that front to protect that money from this Prop 98 sort of rebenching of the funds. And we will definitely keep you all posted on where that ends up as we kind of see where the legislature sort of negotiates on the governor's May Revise.
And just to let everybody know, we've joined a letter with a number of other organizations who are also incredibly concerned about this. The governor had made a promise to the transitional kindergarten programs about the amount of funding that they would receive in this coming year. I believe is the first year that all students have the access to transitional kindergarten, including my kid. So we absolutely do understand the importance of this, but it is a difficult and concerning issue.
All right, so I'm going to give a brief overview of what's going on in the May Revise with the student-centered funding formula, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who is the chair of our think tank for the budget. So basically, we've received $210.1 million in one-time money to fully fund the student-centered funding formula this year, with $104.7 million ongoing to fully fund the SCIF in 2025 to 2026. Excuse that typo. There's also going to be a deferral for $531.6 million for the SCIF from 2025 to 2026 to 26 to 27. So those are sort of the numbers for the May Revise. I know that one of the big concerns is, of course, the hold harmless has sort of been switched to the funding floor, and that is going to leave our hold harmless colleges without a COLA in this already difficult sort of financial climate. So I'm going to hand it off to Sarah for a couple minutes to just give the rundown on all this incredible SCIF advocacy that we've been doing at FACC, and bringing other schools up to Sacramento to do a budget advocacy and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, hello, everyone. Good evening. Currently, our efforts to move towards a fairer funding model for the state, at least an easier funding model for the state, is ongoing and multi-year. But currently, our advocacy is focusing on the universal COLA. As Anna just mentioned, the hold harmless districts are singled out to not receive a COLA right this upcoming year. And there is a problem inherently in denying COLAs for some districts not meeting SCIF metrics and providing COLAs for others that also don't meet them. For example, many of our districts that are currently on the stability funding under the SCIF also don't meet SCIF metrics. Yet if you're in stability, you receive a COLA. If you're on hold harmless, you don't receive a COLA. Our current enrollment trends across the state show that almost every district, in fact, it shows every district save for one, is actually in an enrollment growth mode. And the budget reflects that in terms of, handing out these growth monies. But if you're in the hold harmless category, you do not qualify for those growth monies. So that is a double whammy, right, for the hold harmless districts. They can't capture their growth, right, and they can't capture their COLA. So despite the fact that all of the hold harmless category districts are growing, and all of them are going to face cuts next year as a consequence of not receiving this COLA. This arbitrary granting, not granting of a COLA is a really problematic precedent. I would argue it's a really dangerous precedent to set for all districts. And these are some things I just want you to consider, and that will help you explain why we are prioritizing this as our number one mission this budget cycle. One is that there are more districts on hold harmless this year than there were last year. The SCIF is an incredibly unstable funding model, and districts jump from one category of funding to the other. So just because you're on one funding category this year does not mean that's going to be the funding category you are going to be on next year. With the crackdown on fraudulent enrollments across the state, we should actually see very different enrollment trends next year, and even more extremely the following year, which may affect people's status under the funding model. So you don't want to turn a blind eye to the poor districts this year that aren't getting it, because it may be your poor district 1 year or 2 years from now who is similarly punished, right, for not meeting, all right, these metrics. With the uncertainty of the federal financial aid, with the uncertainty of the impact of the federal crackdown on undocumented residents, we could see these factors also greatly affecting, right, our SCIF metrics, especially those that are in the supplemental category. So once again, we don't want to get into the habit of punishing districts who don't make some of these arbitrary thresholds. We know the SCIF is an imperfect funding model. We know this. That's why there's so many fixes to it. There's actually currently 5 different ways you can be funded under the SCIF because one size does not fit all. So with such an unstable funding model, I think it's a really dangerous thing to target districts and say, you are unworthy. And particularly when we think about some of the districts that are impacted by this are in urban areas where there are no other options. And so it's really the students of these areas that are going to pay because classes will be canceled, access will be denied, and they won't have another option to meet their educational needs. And finally, just to wrap it all up, the initial rationale for denying hold harmless districts a COLA was based on a debatable methodology for creating averages in terms of expenditures per student. The LAO's office, when they wrote their paper advocating for withholding COLAs from hold harmless districts, did 2 very questionable things when they were calculating their averages. They, one, used a weighted average. The weighted average, therefore, sort of took focus away from large population districts and gave small population districts sort of more weight. That's where the weight was. Secondly, they included all of the basic aid districts in their calculations. Now, basic aid districts have no control how much they get per student. They have their enrollments, they get their money, and then you divide it up, and that's how much they have. It is completely unlike the rest of us who have to meet these criteria, right, under the SCIF model. So including basic aid districts in their measurements and their averages was completely, we argued inappropriate. And actually, when we asked them to run their numbers again, but removing the basic aid districts, and what they found after that was that hold harmless were not spending more per student. It was actually the stability districts that were. So there goes the argument of why hold harmless districts should be penalized. It went right out the window. So
Yeah.
thank you for your time, and back to you, Anna.
Yeah, so rest assured that we are doing a lot of work on this. We've had some colleges come up to Sacramento. We've been attending all of the budget hearings to make our voice loud and clear on this issue. So yeah, and I will hand it over to Steph to kind of close us out. And
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah was actually one of the people we had who led a group of faculty, and not just faculty, we had a trustee and some other folks in her group as well. We set up the meetings for them. They were able to meet with budget folks in the swing space and in the Capitol. So if that is something you might be interested in moving forward, please feel free to contact us. We will have our email addresses up here. So I wanted to hit a couple of other items looking at the budget more broadly. When we're talking about the state budget, we can't just talk about this year, because we know that the Department of Finance and the Ledge Analyst Office, they're looking to the future, and we sort of all have to do that. We need to know what's coming, and our districts need to know what's coming if they're going to do their best to calculate what's going to happen down the line. Usually the Legislative Analyst Office, which again advises the legislature, and the Department of Finance, which is the executive arm, usually they're not too consistent with their calculations. We've seen that especially the last few years. This year, and looking forward to the 26-27, 27-28 year, they're all kind of predicting very, very close deficits within several $billion, which sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about the fourth largest economy in the world, a couple $1 billion really isn't too crazy. So if you look at 26-27 here on the screen, it's only off by about $1 billion, $2 billion. If you look at 27-28, it's off by a few more. And then hopefully with some of the efforts that are being proposed in the May Revise, they're hoping to see these numbers get close. So what these numbers are based off of is the ledge analyst or the Department of Finance doing the calculations wholly based on the governor's May Revise and his May Revise proposal. And they've put out in their reports, the legislature should probably look at some of the suggestions in the May Revise, some of these cuts, and really think about long-term savings approaches, which is a contrast to what we've seen the last few years, right? We had so many years there where there was a surplus. They had to abide by the GAN limits and ensure that the state didn't have too much money. So it really is kind of a slingshot at the Capitol and at the state level. So it's interesting to watch. It is a concern. We will be staying on top of this, but that's basically where we are. We are looking at these operating deficits over the next several years. I think it's also worth noting that in California, there are a few things that make estimating how much money the state actually has pretty difficult. The way our tax structure is, the fluctuations we've seen in the economy most recently over the past couple of months, and then anytime we have these massive wildfires or these disasters, especially in counties like LA County, where they have such a large tax base. When you live in a county that has these kinds of natural disasters happen, oftentimes those folks actually don't have to file their taxes until October, and that makes calculating how much they're going to pay in incredibly difficult for the state. We saw that several years ago. I think there was one year where we had 50 counties out of 58 that didn't have to file their taxes until October, and that completely threw the numbers off. So these are all things that are being figured out at that state level. So what's next? We have to have a legislative budget bill passed by midnight Saturday, June 15th. As I mentioned, the legislature won't get paid if it's not passed, which is pretty good incentive for most of them. The governor has until the 27th to sign, veto, line item veto the actual bill. And then in late June, we start with the trailer bills, and that's a lot of work on Anna's end, on my end, when we're actually negotiating what these programs may or may not look like. And then, of course, for the state level, the fiscal year begins on July 1st. It is worth noting that this is different from the federal budget process, where their fiscal year begins on October 1st. So different calendars. How can you help? This is super important. As I mentioned at the beginning, every single person on this call is a factivist. So we want you to use that power. You all have power. You've all got power on your campuses. You're all leaders in your departments or in your unions or in your academic senates, whatever. So take this opportunity to meet with your local legislators, especially if you have one that is sitting on a budget committee. You can also watch the budget subcommittees on the Assembly or the Senate websites. If you want to Google those, it's literally in the top corner. It says watch live now. And then join the FACC Advocates listserv. I know a lot of you are already on it, but we have to put that plug in. And then ask yourself, how can we help you? Can we help you set up meetings? Help you make calls, figure out who your representatives are? You can see my email address on the screen, Anna's is as well. Reach out to us. We want to help you. The more we help you, the more we help the state in general and faculty as a whole. You can also host a FACC regional conversation at your campus. You can see a couple of pictures of the ones that we've had in the past. We can help you bring legislators to the campus to discuss the future of community colleges. I know that you're all thinking about summertime, but we're already looking to the fall. And that's an amazing time to have legislators visit your campus because they're back in the district. They're not in their Sacramento offices, and that's great. And they've got that ability to really come and get to know your faculty and your campus.
All right, folks, thank you for taking time to be with us. I hope you had a great long weekend and hope you learned some things about the May Revise and are ready to go out and do some budget advocacy. Steph, if you could just move to the next slide, please. I do have a QR code. Oh, wait, maybe it didn't.
I don't think it transferred onto this one.
Oopsies. Okay, never mind. That's fine. Well, you can email us at our personal emails or at info@fac.org with any questions if you'd like us to set up ledge meetings for you, any of that good stuff. So yeah, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much.